Wonderful. Hello, everyone. We will give everyone just 1 minute to join the room, but thank you for joining. I'm skimming through the list of attendees, and it looks like a lot of the companies in here have either been to a Resi before, joined us hopefully for the Innovators Pitch Challenge, if not at a previous Resi for a future Resi. We have both Resi Europe coming up in March as well as San Diego in June and Boston in September. So there's no shortage of pitching opportunities for us. However, a lot of the tips and tricks that we're going to be giving today are applicable not only to the Innovators Pitch Challenge at Resi, but really in any investor meeting that you guys are going to be taking. And some house cleaning items is one, this webinar will be recorded. So if there is a colleague of yours, or if you have to leave early, if you're going to potentially be joining us late, um, this will be recorded and distributed afterwards. Um, so don't worry, we'll get it out to you, as well as the slides. For an introduction, I am Max Bratt. I lead the business development team at LSN, which means I get to work directly with companies, not only to get them signed up to Resi using our database, but ultimately ready to take on a 9 to 18 month fundraising show, which includes pitching to investors, taking investor meetings, and a lot of the BD and sales 101 that it takes to sufficiently maintain a 19-month roadshow.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Dio. I'm the VP of Product at Life Science Nation, and one of the things that I do is I am in charge of our educational content, like this webinar, and all of our other classes and webinars that we do. We work with a lot of first-time CEOs, and one of the things that we like to do is help make sure that, the common pitfalls that we see, and that we've seen frequently over our years in the company and doing the Resi conference, that we can help prevent, because it can make your fundraising campaign easier, more efficient. And so this kind of one of the reasons why we do this is just to make sure that you are as prepared as possible for pitching in front of an investor.
And like Karen said, we're good at it. So we have kept a running list of the companies who have either used our database, come to Resi, and then turned around and told us that they received funding through LSN. That list is about 90, and we going through that list have seen that it has helped over those 90 companies raise $1.3 billion dollars. And that is spread out throughout all sectors of life science, right? So that's therapeutics, medical devices, diagnostics, and digital health. And while the intricacies of the technology change a lot between the different sectors and subsectors, a lot of the basics for pitching and fundraising remain the same. The biggest difference is going to just be the change of target list that you target for investors. However, a lot of the how do you do that? How do you canvas the list? And what this webinar will focus on is how do you effectively tell a pitch remains the same. And Karen, I'm going to ask for your help because I'm sharing my screen. I can't see any of the incoming questions, so I may ask you to field those as we go.
Absolutely.
To start, and I know we kind of just went through this, an introduction to LSN. So at the core of what we do, we are a data company. So this slide is slightly outdated because it says 3,500 different investors. The reality is our database now contains over 4,000 global investors, as well as we have access to a business development database of roughly 70,000 companies and assets. That ties well into the second column here, which seems to be what a lot of us know about is Resi. So redefining every stage of investment. It used to be early stage, and it is still very much so focused on early stage, which for us is seed through Series B. And so if you are a fundraising company raising capital between seed, roughly 1 to 2 million, Series A, 2 to 10 million, or Series B, 10 to 50, what we found is one, the check size matters a lot more than the name of the round. And so at that stage, the investors that you need to be talking to are going to be a combination of venture capital, strategic, pharma and med tech, angels, family offices. And the reality is going to be a lot of times the investor you need to talk to is going to be someone you've never heard of. And fundraising boils down to playing the numbers game and talking to as many of the qualified investors as you can. And so we host Resi 5 times a year to bring those groups together. If you're a fundraising company and you can follow us to Lisbon in March, San Diego in June, Boston in September, you've now taken 60 to 80 investor meetings over the course of the next 6 months, which is what it takes to be successful in fundraising. Um, and one of the things that we do at Resi that's kind of unique is we're very thorough in how we vet the attending investors. So every investor that attends, we require them to both get on the phone with our team or to at least give approval on the current mandate that we have, meaning we get to find out exactly what sectors, subsector indication, modality, check size, geography even, that these funds and firms are looking to invest into, which we use both at the partnering platform as Resi as well as to curate the database that I talked about a moment ago. Our next two silos of business are LSM Labs and then our publications, which is Karen's domain, so I'll let her speak a little bit more about those.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, LSN Labs is kind of our educational silo. So this goes with, having companies look use our educational content. We have recorded classes. We'll do assessments of companies to help them gauge their investor readiness and the readiness of their marketing materials. We work with tech hubs and regional organizations to prepare companies for various conferences. So that's kind of where the education component comes in, just trying to ensure that companies um, are ready. For more mature companies that, don't have too much on their plate, we also have our BD Assist product where we will essentially serve as your BD person doing the outreach on your behalf and scheduling meetings to sort of take that burden off of the CEO because for a lot of it, it's time consuming but rote. And so that's something that we have experience with and we can take over getting one thing off the CEO's plate. In terms of publications, our CEO Dennis wrote a book, and we can definitely share a digital version of that book with you for free. So let us know if you're interested. And we also do a weekly newsletter where we put in information and, things about our conferences, what we've been doing, what are things that are coming up, partnerships, and we also have occasionally partners posting information there as well.
Perfect. So we will talk today about the overview of preparing for a pitch, what makes a good presentation, as well as preparing for questions, which is a huge component of any pitch, whether it is a structured pitch like our Innovators Pitch Challenge or just an investor meeting. The ability to effectively field questions is incredibly important. So before I dive into the overview of preparing, I kind of want to start with slide 0, which isn't quite in writing here, but it's the importance of picking the right event and picking the right investor to talk to. We see this a lot when we host Resi JPM, and we see it a lot now as we're traveling to Lisbon and there's a lot of partnering activity that's happening around Europe at the same time. The importance of avoiding a lot of the noise, and I'll use JPM as an example, is we just came off of our largest event to date by terms of investor registration. We had 800 investors with us at Resi JPM, and every early stage company hears about JPM and they think that if I'm raising capital, I need to get to San Francisco and I need to be there. And the same concept is true with a lot of the bigger partnering events around both the world and specifically upcoming in March in Lisbon. However, if you're an early stage company and you spend half of your budget and half of your time and resources to pay an expensive ticket to get to an event where the main discussion and the main focus is later stage assets, phase 2B and beyond for potential licensing or even a vendor show where it's CROs, CDMOs, regional organization type groups. Um, that isn't where you need to be. You need to have a solid understanding of knowing your audience, right? And so Resi focuses on getting the slightly riskier seed, Series A, and Series B, typically preclinical type assets, um, at least on the therapeutic side, and the same match on the other sectors of life science, in front of capital investors. And so if you're raising true funds, you kind of play the game of chicken and the egg, where you may go talk to a big pharma or a big med tech, and they tell you, we need sufficient data to turn around and either license or invest in the company. And you go, okay, that's great. I can get it, but I need money. And so part of the fundraising game is speaking with the right people and attending the right events. And obviously, in order to do so, you have to know the audience of who's attending. And so when I turn around and I say Resi is going to bring and have the largest collective of early stage investors, what does that mean? And I can tell you that at LSN, we track investors across 10 different categories. You can see on the left here, I've listed a few of them. I know within our investor network, the groups that we primarily see are going to be venture capital, large strategics and corporate venture capital, angels and angel syndicates, family offices. However, we will work with anyone who can write a check, right? So endowments, foundations, institutional, hedge funds, government organizations. There's no shortage of groups out there that are looking for early stage capital. Um, and even amongst these, and I'll use VCs again as another example, there's different types, right? So there's late stage VCs who their capital is intended for growth and hiring a marketing and hiring a sales team. There's mid stage who they want de-risked assets, right? Phase 2B and beyond or proof of concept. And then there's a whole other subset of early stage venture capital groups that are looking for early stage investments. And so again, I cannot stress the importance enough of knowing the types of investors, not just that are going to be attending the events that you're looking at, but that you need to be speaking with. Um, and don't just look at VCs, don't just look at angels, don't just look at family offices. There's a lot of different groups out there that are good fits. Karen, do you want to talk now a little bit more about the importance of knowing the
Absolutely.
format of the pitch?
So, as the importance of knowing your audience is when deciding which event to go to, it's also important to not just know your audience, but know the event, especially when you're doing a pitch. How long is the pitch? Is there Q&A? Who's going to be on the panel? Do you know anything about who they are and what their experience is? Who's going to be in the audience? The last thing that you want to do is enter an event like this and not be prepared, because that is a ticket to a bad first impression. And that's the last thing that you want, especially if you know that there are going to be investors in the audience. So make sure that you know ahead of time what the format is. I've seen anything from, 2-minute pitches to 10-minute pitches and everything in between. And, a lot of these events also have timers. And if, you're in the middle of your pitch and it's clear you're nowhere near done, and then that beeping goes off, that's a sign that you did not adequately prepare. So make sure that you spend your time yourself. There are a lot of really good tools out there that you can use uh, to practice your pitch and make sure that you are ready. So use them. There's even great tools just built into PowerPoint where you can rehearse. It will time you. It will give you information on the cadence of your speaking. If you're in a monotone, if you're speaking too fast, too slow, if you're using too many filler words like or so use the tools that you have, practice, 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 and really be ready.
I didn't know about that tip until I met Karen, and she told me about Microsoft PowerPoint has the feature in there that I think it's just called Rehearse with Coach or something.
Yes.
And it's really, really useful. Like Karen said, it can give you insight that otherwise you wouldn't know until it's too late. Um, and I don't think the concept of being prepared for a pitch is something that people don't expect to know. But there's a lot of things that if you don't know them, you don't know them. And so at least on the Innovators Pitch Challenge, I'll go through and answer the questions that we have on the board now is how long do you have to pitch? At IPC, our format is we do a 6-minute pitch with 7 minutes of Q&A from the investor judges. And so yes, there is a panel for Q&A. Who is on it is sector-specific investor judges, meaning the process we use to recruit these judges is one in which we sign up the companies and we group them into categories of four, typically along the lines of similar technology, similar indication, or similar modality, where we can then assemble a judging panel of between 4 to 6 investor judges that we've identified as representing funds and representing firms who are actively investing into that technology area. And so it's an unbelievable opportunity for the pitching presenter to not only present to the entirety of the room, but specifically to the investor judges who are one, good targets because they're investing in your area, but they're also seasoned judges. So many of them have been pitching judges with us before. They've heard thousands of pitches before, and they're also providing written feedback, not just on the performance of the actual pitch, right? Were you rushing? How do the slides appear? Is it cohesive? Um, but also on the more technical aspects of the company. And a warning is we do encourage these judges to be tough with their questions. Um, and so not only is it the investor judges who are going to be there, but also who else is in the audience is going to be a room full of investors. And so because we label it based off of session and we publicize the session name based off of again technology interest or modality, a lot of other investors who may not be joining on the judging panel but still representing funds that invest into that area will handpick the sessions that they want to attend. And so we do see an influx of other investor judges join the room throughout the session.
Yeah, and I will also add, I generally recommend for companies to view this as an exercise for exposure, for experience, for learning what kinds of questions investors will ask. Because it's one of the biggest fallacies of anything like this is just like you don't walk into an investor meeting and walk out with a check, you're not going to go to a pitch event and walk out with a check. That being said, we have seen events where one of the companies that pitched at our conference, there was an investor who was on the judging panel and then ended up investing in them a year later. And so even if you don't necessarily, even if you're not going to walk out with a check, that doesn't mean you're not going to build a valuable relationship that could lead to a check. So that's why it's important to take these things seriously and to really view them as a way to get your name out there because you never know who's going to be in the audience and what might end up coming from that in the future, which is why you want to make sure that you are prepared and that you are ready. And people are always like, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm not going to have problems. I know that my pitch will be in time." You absolutely need to try and time yourself because the time either goes much faster or much slower than you think. Um, so you want to make sure that you know exactly what the timing is as how your pitch goes.
Yeah. And expanding on what Karen said, there's a lot of reasons to participate. One, yes, it's the ability to connect directly with the people in the room. Karen shared the example of someone who we know who actually received a check, I think a year down the line. We probably have a lot more examples of people who may have been introduced to people through the pitch session, right? And so it's not uncommon at all that an investor judge or any investor for that reference can say, I don't invest directly in your area. However, I know a lot of investors that do. And so an investor judge, of course, we've designed it in a way where they're going to invest in your area. However, for other investors in the room, they investors syndicate, and so they work together a lot, and it's always worthwhile to just expose yourself to as many investors as you can. And participating in the IPC allows you to get that increased visibility. Not only is it the pitch session, but the package also includes both a table and a poster space in the main conference foyer. And so throughout the entirety of the Resi Day, between partnering and session rooms, there's investors constantly walking around there. And it's a great opportunity to sit there with your poster. Anyone who passes you by, say, hello, can I tell you a little bit about my company? Where do you invest? XYZ. And easily take your Resi presence from 6 to 8 meetings to 15 to 20 by the combination of both prearranged as well as just ad hoc meetings. And this is something that we really preach heavily at Resi, but we are the only conference that has pretty close to a 1-to-1 ratio of entrepreneurs to investors. And in fact, at many of the recent conferences, we've actually had more investors there than we had companies. And what that creates is a relatively easy to network environment. One that is informal in a positive way, meaning it's not a room full of 100 companies and 100 startups trying to pounce and talk to the two investors that may be there. Every investor walks around wearing a red badge, and so it's very, very easy for you to go up, shake their hand, find out if they're investing in your area, and then take them to your poster and tell them a little bit about your company. And, like we've said a lot, 6 minutes to pitch is never, ever going to be sufficient time to share everything about your technology, nor will one day of a partnering event be. But what you want to do, both through the pitch as well as just the entirety of Resi, is connect. Connect with as many people as you can, both in the 30-minute meetings, as well as, like I said, in the pitch and as the poster session. And you should be able to leave there with a large list of investor targets that you can then turn around and add to your list of targets. And so that is probably the biggest reason of why to participate. Of course, there's others, right? So some competitions may have prizes. We've seen cash prizes. We've seen services where, potentially a sponsor might provide an in-kind prize. Um, at Resi, we offer free Resi tickets to some of our upcoming events. And so the first place winner gets 3 tickets for future events. Second place gets two, and the third place gets one. Um, and so again, what that means is if you come and you do well in the pitch challenge and you do well in recruiting people to come vote for you with their Resi Cash, you can then turn around, win the competition, and have the next 6 months of fundraising funded and paid for, right? Meaning that the next 60 to 80 investor meetings that you can take um, through Resi will be as a result of a complimentary ticket. And
Uh,
so, one, there's prizes. There's also just feedback. And so I've spoken a little bit about that, but one is great practice as well as you'll actually get written feedback from the judges.
yeah.
Karen?
I do also want to mention, as we said, also exposure. Most events will feature the companies, pitching companies in their newsletter, in publications, prominent signage. So that also is extremely valuable. But the other thing that I did want to mention, though, is we did get a question about incorporating a video into your pitch. There are no hard and fast rules as to what you should and shouldn't do with a pitch, but using a video is something that you need to be very careful about. I would say that if you're narrating and the video is crucial to people understanding how your technology works, and it can be, if you're careful, it can be done well. But you want to make sure that you are not distracting from you and like what you can say about your technology when you're using a video. So you do want to be careful.
Yeah. To add to what Karen says, we've seen great examples of videos, short little, 5 to 10 second animations that make it a lot easier to either understand the technology or if it's a medical device, understand the actual device itself. Those work really well. However, on the other end of the spectrum is we've seen videos can lead to the pitch becoming very overwhelming. Um, and if you are trying to sit there and watch a pitch and absorb information from 3 to 4 different areas at one time, typically that means that you've absorbed none of it, right? If the presenter is speaking as well as there's text on the slide and the video is speaking with text, the judges will simply just not be able to absorb the information. And so if you do want to consider using a video, I highly encourage you to make sure that it is simple and easy to follow, not just as a standalone video, but in the sequence of your pitch.
Yeah. There's also another question here about what Resi Cash is and how voting works. So yeah, um, we often forget that it's it's strange to people who've never been to the conference. So the way it works is that each attendee is given what we call Resi Cash. It's like Monopoly money. And what happens is you have a box at your conference seat or at your table where your poster is, and investors can come, or all conference attendees can come by and they can put it in your box as they vote for you, and you want to get the most investments that you can. So it's kind of like I mean, it is essentially gamification of the system, but the point is that we are trying to encourage you to speak to as many people as possible at the conference, and to go out there and have conversations, and in that way get people to engage with you and invest in your company.
And it's also factored into the winner. And so when we calculate the winner of the pitch competition, we factor in both the amount of Resi cash that you've gotten at your poster, as well as obviously the performance and the judges' feedback. They both have written feedback that's more qualitative, as well as they actually go and score you on a quantitative factor. But the Resi cash is a huge component of who wins IPC. And one of the tips that I tell every company who's participating is go ask people to vote for you. As simple as it may sound, the companies who almost always win are the companies who are actively recruiting Resi Cash. Um, so much so that we've, jokingly had people say to us in the past, like, "Oh, how are you going to let this person win? They just sit there and recruit for cash." That is what fundraising is. You have to be very proactive in going and asking both the people in the room to vote for you, as well as anyone who may stop by your panel or your poster. Ask them, say, if you liked my company and you find what I'm doing interesting and compelling, can I have your Resi Cash? And that typically has a pretty big impact on the results of the pitch competition.
Yeah, our CEO always likes to say that fundraising is a numbers game. And so going out there and getting in front of investors and explaining who you are, that's what we're trying to encourage. And we have a question here saying that it's a popularity contest. No, not strictly, because there are two components to the way the winner is decided, and there's a very strong component of the judging. So the judges' scores do also weight heavily into who wins. So the Resi Cash is just a piece of it, but it does play a role. And as I said, the point is not to make it a popularity contest. The point is to encourage companies to go out there and talk to as many people as possible, because that is how you will get your company going forward.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So now that we've talked a lot about pre-pitch preparation, the question then becomes, what do I cover in my pitch? And just like a pitch deck or a pitch presentation, you can ask, 10 people and probably get 20 different answers. However, this is what we have seen work really well with the hundreds, if not thousands, of companies that we've had come through the Resi Turnstiles, as well as this is the feedback that we hear from the investors, right? And so 6 minutes, again, is quick. That means it's not time to dive into depth on any particular aspect, but you should touch at a very high level on a number of things. And so if you're an investor, when you first meet a company, you have a checklist in your head, and we call that the risk stack, right? So what's the technology risk? How is it different? What do their milestones look like? What is the IP? What does the management team look like? All of these things that an investor is essentially saying, they check this off, they check this off, they check this off. Is it now worth a deeper dive? And so for us, 6 minutes to cover the pitch, we recommend you include a high level overview of the unmet need, the technology, how is it different both within the product design itself as well as within the competitive landscape, any key milestones that you've achieved, and then something else, right? Whether it's the management team, key opinion leaders, any notable funding to date, as well as potentially some interesting insight on the market. But please, like Karen has said before, keep the time limit in mind. You really want to keep it within the time limit and appear polished. Um, and part of doing so is knowing how much information to share on each one of these aspects.
The one thing that I will absolutely highlight that a lot of people don't do enough of is, the emphasis on what makes your technology unique. because, you need to be able to justify why would anyone be spending money to use this product, this technology? Why would they change the way they do treatments for it? There's a lot of different components that come into play in terms of, the justification on the medical front or the client's part. Be cognizant of what the marketplace is like and don't try to fool the investors and assume they don't know the marketplace because they do.
Yeah,
And so you have to be able to explain it well in a way that will make sense. So you definitely want to be sure that you're taking into account that you're talking to experts, especially at our conferences. These are not people that are unfamiliar with the landscape and how the system works. That you don't have to explain to them how big the cancer market is or how big the diabetes market is. They already know that. They want you to be able to articulate to them why you, why now, and why this technology.
exactly. And like Karen said, a lot of the investor attendees at the entirety of Resi, but specifically those that are going to be on the IPC judging panel, are going to be managing directors, general partners of the fund. And so they know the market. It doesn't mean you need to go up there and spend 2 of your 6 minutes talking about here's the TAM, here's the SAM, here's the SOM. They're gonna know the market. They want to hear you touch on it and trust that you have done your research and have a good understanding of it. But there are certain aspects that you should cover at a very high level, and some in which you may go into more depth. Um, and so we'll talk a little bit about that here on each of these messaging tips. The first messaging tip is to clearly describe your technology. So this is an area in which you can spend a little bit more time. Um, Meaning, at high level, you don't go in there and say, my company has a proprietary treatment for many critical illnesses. You want to be specific, right? Don't be too vague. You want to touch on where are you in terms of the sector, subsector, indication, and what exactly does your technology do? So, for instance, a better way of saying that would be by saying, we're developing an IND-ready small molecule asset for breast cancer by activating natural killer cells. And so this is what we call a tagline. It's a one sentence explanation that clearly describes what you do. Um, and so if you have data that supports this, if you have studies that you've done, share that information as well. Investors want to see what you're doing differently. How are you better than what's currently being developed, what's on the market? Because at the end of the day, they also want to see what is the potential return on investment for them. And so again, we'll talk a little bit about that more in a second with long-term strategy, but it does all stem from the technology. You can never forget the fact that this is science. You need to show your science. You need to show the data that you have that supports your science. However, do it at a high level. Say this is what we have, and you don't need to go too much in depth, but do present it.
Yeah, I would also add that, being aware not just of what is currently on the market, but also what is in development can be key. So, make sure that you have a good grounding of the landscape. But the one thing that you want to make sure that you don't do is overinflate. You want to be realistic with your statements. Because again, investors will know when you're exaggerating. They want to have faith that you know what you're talking about. They want to see enthusiasm. They want to see passion, but they want to know that it's still grounded in reality. Don't make statements like we have no competition
It's
or
the
we're
number
going
one
to
red flag
change
that we see right
what?
there. I said that's almost always something that we see, and it's always a red flag for investors.
Yes. Or something along the lines of um, we're going to solve all of cancer or all of diabetes or all of hospital infections or something like that. You can't make overblown statements like that. They're very obvious and they're very much a turnoff as far as investors are concerned. So that's something that you definitely want to avoid when you make your statements. But they definitely make sure that you are being realistic, and make sure that you are accurately representing it. So you don't need to undersell what you do. Just keep that in mind. But the key is to really know the landscape and be able to articulate it, and to know your technology and be able to articulate it clearly.
Karen, I think we got maybe two questions. I don't know if you want to read those.
Oh, no, those are automatic replies from AI.
Perfect. And so the next tip is going to be explain your current company status. And this kind of has two parts. One, don't spend the entirety of your pitch saying, here's what we've done, because you also need to transition into part two, which is where are we going? And so the first part of the pitch is really an outline of your current status. However, then you need to quickly get to the strategic direction. One of the best ways of doing this is with a Gantt chart. Walk through one, how much are you fundraising? You would be surprised by how many companies get up there and they do a pitch and they talk about their company and they never include the ask. Um, Include what you're asking for. How much money are you fundraising? What milestones does it help you achieve? What runway does it give you? At what time frame do you expect these milestones to come in? And how much of the total fundraising ask is assigned for each of those key inflection points? And so we have examples of Gantt charts that we can send out after this. I'll make sure to include that. But it essentially touches on all of those items in a visual chart. And so it's done chronologically where it addresses time, milestone, and cost of each. And we tell companies map that out for your next 2 to 3 years worth of operations, and that's going to be your ask. So if you're raising a Series A and you say I'm raising 15 million for a Series A, it will likely be a tranche round, and you can tranche it with the key inflection points that come along the way. But what you don't want to do, knowing that fundraising is 9 to 18 months and a full-time job, is raise capital and then turn around and immediately start raising capital again. Um, well, that is somewhat inevitable because as CEO, you'll always be connecting with investors. Give yourself enough runway to actually operate. And so that comes into terms of both your ask as well as the ability to express why you have the number that you do.
Yeah, and one of the things that is, just I want to highlight is you're not necessarily going to be able to talk about all of this in depth. Actually, you're definitely not going to be able to talk about all of this in depth while you're pitching, but having the information in your deck, and touching on it and then going back to it if an investor has a specific question about it can make a big difference. So, these are things that we're telling you that you're not going to be able to talk about in detail about all of these things. And especially, if it's a short pitch, 6 minute pitch doesn't give you a lot of time. So just keep that in mind. But these are things that investors do want to know pretty quickly because it's one of the major ways that they qualify deals in terms of yes, no, is it a fit for me? Is it not a fit for me? So having that information easily available to an investor can make is a good thing to helping them gauge their interest and ask relevant questions.
Yeah. And we've kind of bled over a little bit into messaging tip three here, but summarize both near and long-term strategy. Well, yes, it's important to do it at the big macro level of what is my ask. It's also important to do it at some of the smaller levels. So for instance, one of the things that's listed here, it's the third bullet that I really like, is if no issued patents, state how many applications are out there, how many you filed, or how many you're planning to file. Um, that is a lot better than saying, no, we don't have any patents. It shows that there is progress being made, and something to get the investors surrounding the company and surrounding the momentum that you're gonna get the milestones that you say you're gonna achieve. And the same is true with key opinion leaders, any collaborations either with medical centers, hospital systems, big pharma, manufacturers, show that not only, again, is there progress being made, but that there is strategic vision to what you're choosing to do.
And one thing again, that I will add, like I will harp on this is, not exaggerating. I've heard stories from investors, who say that they were watching a company pitch and they were like, oh yes, this key opinion leader is involved and is like part of the board, and then they'll reach out to that KOL and they have absolutely no idea who the company is. Investors will do their due diligence. So you want to make sure that if you say that someone is involved in the company, they actually are involved. So make sure that you're being realistic in those statements as well.
Yeah. And providing enough information but not going overboard is one of the biggest themes that Karen and I have talked about, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. But the one thing that I will point out is it says that the pitch deck and the executive summary should complete the application. Um, and one of the things that we do with our Innovators Pitch Challenge is as part of the application, you will send us your and submit your materials. We send these to the investor judges ahead of time so that they're not starting from absolute zero when they go up and listen to your pitch. They're going to be familiar with the technology and with the management team at a high level. And it's going to make it that much easier for them to follow what you're saying because, again, we know 6 minutes is quick. And so they do their homework a little bit ahead of time.
So in terms of what questions they're going to ask you, it could be anything from more information on the technology, like specifics on how the technology works or things like that. It could be information on the milestones that you've achieved, data that you're going for, future directions. There could be a lot of different ways that they could take that. It could be more information on the market and competition, maybe specific questions about why you are choosing to go in a specific direction first. Why are you choosing a specific indication first? What are the, barriers to entry? What is the competitive landscape? Maybe more information about how you differ from your competition. There might be questions about regulatory or reimbursement strategy. Maybe more information about your path to exit and, questions about who you're talking to and if you're talking to strategics or anything like that. Other than that, maybe they might ask more information on the management team and who's involved, and again, maybe more about key opinion leaders or things like that. So it could be anything from there. The one thing that I will definitely make sure to emphasize is if you don't know the answer, it is perfectly okay to say that you don't know, or maybe that you don't have a strategy in place yet. Don't try to make up an answer because again, investors will see right through that. It's better to say I need to look more into that than to just make up an answer because investors, especially in the early stages, they know that you won't necessarily have all the answers. And they might even be asking this question to highlight something that you need to think about. And so you want to make sure that you are give it like that. Don't try to just come up with an answer without being prepared.
Yeah.
Um,
However,
Maybe the
to
same in
add
terms.
on,
Yeah,
oh, sorry.
go ahead.
To add on to what Karen was saying, don't feel inclined to give an answer that you're not prepared to give. However, don't just say, I don't know. Um, provide, say, I don't know, the information that I need to make that decision is XYZ, right? And so if an investor asks you a question as to what particular indication you may be pursuing, and you're currently running tests to get the answer to that, share that. Say, we don't know exactly, we're awaiting data to make that decision, or once we have received funding of this amount, we can then run this test to identify the lead asset. Anything along that answer again ties back into showing the strategic vision, although there isn't a solid answer.
Mhm.
Um, One of the most common question formats we get is simply going to be if you've done a good job and you've explained the high level of all of this, can you go explain this in a little bit more detail? That's a great question. And it means that they're more interested to hear, again, like Karen said, any one of these particular topics. Um, One, you could simply go back a few slides and maybe speak into a bit more detail than you had previously. We also see a lot of companies add appendix slides, where, for instance, if you're expecting a particular question on the technology and you only have room to show one graph or one data set on your first presentation, but you have a number of other supporting elements that you want to also potentially include if you think that they could provide more insight, put those in an appendix. And if the question does come up, skip forward a few slides. One, not only does it make it visually a lot easier for them to follow, but it also shows that you've really done your homework. And you know exactly what questions are going to be asked, probably because you've been asked them by other investors.
Yeah, one thing I like to, the one way that I like to frame it is to say, investors don't expect you to have all the answers, but they do expect you to have considered the question. And so even if you say, well, I don't have a solution for that yet, but I am planning on doing X, Y, Z, and based on those results, get answers that will allow me to decide between this and that, that can be a very powerful statement as well. So show that you've done your homework. That's really the key.
Perfect. So we will save a few minutes for Q&A. While anybody wants to type in their questions, I do have to encourage you, if you are a fundraising company and you are looking to get in front of seed, Series A, or Series B investors, whether it is for a currently open round or if you plan on opening a round within the next 9 to 18 months, which I will guess almost everyone will, it is important to play the numbers game of fundraising, and we can help you do so. We'll have 300 global investors with us at Resi Europe, and we'll have over 500 with us at Resi San Diego in June. I highly, highly, highly encourage you not just to participate in partnering to make sure that you can actually secure as many investor meetings as you can, but also participate in the pitch. We have applications open now for both Resi Europe as well as Resi San Diego pitching. It includes not only the ability to actually do the pitch session, you get full partner access to the in-person and virtual days, as well as you get the poster and the table spot that I had mentioned earlier. And so it really just makes sure that you can get as much exposure to our investor network as possible. And so you
Yeah.
can scan the QR codes here. The one thing that I will highlight is the deadline to pitch for Resi Europe is this Friday. So Friday, February 13th. If you guys are interested in pitching and connecting with the 300 European and US based investors that we'll have with us in Lisbon, please sign up to pitch before Friday.
So, Max, there are two more questions here. One is asking about, defining how important it is to frame a new technology area like genomics, early days versus now. What I will say is that it truly depends on the circumstances and where you're pitching. So that's kind of where the know your audience plays in. Are you pitching at an industry event? Are you pitching at something like Resi, or are you pitching at a more uh, generic event where people are not necessarily going to be experts in this area? If you do know ahead of time who's going to be on the panel, some places will publicize things like that, then look them up on LinkedIn. Um, so that you can tell what they know or what their experience is. But a lot can be known just by knowing the specific event where you're pitching.
Yeah, which includes us as part of the group that if you are coming to pitch at Resi, reach out to us. We should send it out in a mass mailer, but if you don't get it, reach out to us personally, and we will make sure that you know the investor judges that will be on your panel ahead of time.
Yeah.
That way you can do your homework just a little bit more in depth.
And then there's another question here for a low cash startup. What are the pros and cons of attending a challenge versus using the database for initial outreach where we can get in front of more investors?
Yeah, so I may be biased, but I think the answer is both. I think that Resi gives you the opportunity to connect directly with investors that are seeking out companies, meaning that you can partner directly within the partnering platform. You can come find those that are, they've raised their hands and they say, I'm looking for companies in this area. The database is designed to really load the top end of your investor outreach funnel. And I say it all the time, but fundraising is BD and sales. And like any sales operation, there is a sales funnel, and the same is true with investors. We know this because we've helped investors find LPs, so we've helped raise funds of funds. And when we do that, we always ask, what is your PowerPoint? What are you pitching to these funds? And the investors will always say, they always have a slide in there that says, we look at X number of companies a year to turn around and invest in Y. And it's almost always something like 800 companies turns into three investments. And so it is a huge numbers game being played on both sides of the ball. At Resi, I think you can get a little bit more of a personalized introduction. In-person meetings typically warrant a better follow-up. They typically warrant more of a introduction to other investors, while the database, quite simply, is the numbers game. And so in the database, we have 4,000 investors, which is going to be more than you'd find at Resi. However, both of them give you the opportunity to filter that subset down into those that are actually a fit for your technology.
Plus, I will also add that, in a fundraising campaign, things never stay static. You're going to be changing as you get feedback. And so going to a conference like Resi and participating in something like the IPC is a great way to get a whole lot of feedback very, very quickly. Because you need to know, is this part resonating with your deck? Or is this part confusing? And are these investors all asking me the same question over and over again, which means I should probably include it in my deck so they don't have to ask me that question and I can answer it for them ahead of time. So it's really an exercise in getting a lot of good feedback on the investor engagement with your technology and in a very quick way. Um, and that can help you if you're utilizing the database to make sure that when you're doing outreach to these investors, you're optimizing what their likely response is. Because if sometimes if they're not impressed with your deck or with your messaging, then it can turn you're losing what could have been a potential maybe and turning it into a no. There is an additional question here about recommending different approaches to seed versus Series A deck and what are the main differences for later stage rounds. Later stage rounds may have more information on, they're not going to be a huge difference. It's probably just going to be, the different types of data. But you're still going to give some information about the most recent milestones, whatever data you may have. And you're still going to give an idea of what the competitive landscape is. It's just the subtle differences in terms of what milestones you're going to be hitting versus what you've already done. But
Yeah.
ultimately, investors still want to answer the same questions. How are you de-risking this? What are your next steps? And knowing that you have a good plan in place for all of that.
Yeah, I would add to that and say that everyone freaks out a little bit when they hear, okay, if I'm raising a seed round for 1 million, how does fundraising change as I progress and start raising 15, 20 million, right? It's a lot of money as the difference. But you would be surprised that fundraising remains relatively the same from raising 1 million versus 50. The amount of time it takes the same. The amount of investors you need to talk to remains the same. The biggest difference, and really the only huge difference, is going to be the groups of investors that you target. And so if you're at your seed round, what you may find is when you run your target list of investors, it may include more angels, it may include more family offices. Um, investors that write checks for your check range. However, when you flip around and you start raising later stage, whether it's A or B or C, all that changes is going to be the target list of investors. A lot of the information that needs to be portrayed, a lot of the actual fundamentals of how do you get a meeting will remain the exact same. And so if that is all the questions, I will again just say thank you to everyone for attending. I'll flip back actually really quickly
It's
to the very start.
there's just a really quick question about what is the investment to participate in Resi Lisbon?
Yeah, the investment for Resi Lisbon, if you'd like to pitch, is 24.95 euros. Um, and again, the pitch deadline is this Friday. So what we'll do is we'll send out a large email after this. It'll include the webinar recording. It'll include the link to register, as well as all of the slides. And we can likely even get you a small discount if you can register before Friday. And so I've left Karen and I's emails up here for anyone who wants to screenshot this, write it down. If you think you may have a question down the road, please reach out to us. We are typically pretty quick to respond and always open.
Yep, absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, everyone. We certainly look forward to either having you participate, hopefully in the pitch at Resi Europe. If not, virtual partnering is always an option, and we do a number of 2026 Resi events. So we certainly hope to see you at one of them.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.